before I get started, I just want to thank all the volunteers for B-Sides, James Carn and his team, and Bow Valley College for hosting. I really appreciate it. I'm quite excited to be back connecting with colleagues in the cybersecurity community here in Calgary. So my name is StefanMyroniuk. I've been working in Calgary for about 22 years, securing and supporting IT environments in various industries. I'm currently an information security and technology manager at the Real Estate Council of Alberta, managing a great team of individuals, a really exciting portfolio of technical programs. So about 2 years ago, I had the idea to further my knowledge and skills in information security, as one does 2 years ago post-pandemic. So I decided to enroll in a master's program at the University of Leicester in Security and Risk Management. It's actually in their criminology faculty, so it was a little bit of a different take on cybercrime and cybersecurity. It seemed like a good idea at the beginning, but partly I thought, okay, this is going to further my career aspirations, and this will be great. A year in, I kind of realized this is an interesting life that I have. So working full time, managing, a family, reading a bunch of different articles late at night, waking up 6 a.m. because all the classes are in UK time, attending class, writing papers on the weekend, going to soccer games and swimming, working in the car. So I'm here, it's done, recently graduated this summer, so woo, got it done. So this presentation is really about my academic research for that program, and I want to explain kind of what we did for the last 6 months. So next slide, please. We're still having technical issues. Unfortunately, this presentation is very visual. There we go. Great. Here's the agenda. I'm going to just go quickly through this. So I'm going to explain why cybersecurity risk assessments, I selected that as a research topic. You'll see CRA a little bit in my slide deck. That means cybersecurity risk assessment. I may even say CRA. Research methods and research aims and objectives. I'll go a little bit through that. The sample, the data, the findings, that's really the bulk of the presentation, and then the conclusions. Next slide. So what is a cybersecurity risk assessment? So one of the definitions I like is a cybersecurity risk assessment is an assessment of an organization's ability to protect its information and its information systems from cyber threats. The purpose of a cybersecurity risk assessment is to identify, assess, prioritize risks to information and information systems. That's from IT Governance USA. Now, you notice the scorecard on the right-hand side there. That's based on the National Institute Standards of Technology. So that's a NIST scorecard, if you will, based on their cybersecurity framework. Very common to see a scorecard like this after you complete a cybersecurity risk assessment based on a specific type of risk framework. And a lot of it is an aggregation of some of the technical vulnerabilities that have been detected, whether it's high, medium, low, but this is kind of that aggregate score. Now, NIST in particular has several special papers or special publications related to cybersecurity risk assessment. One of the interesting things that I read from researching NIST is in the 800.30, risk management process should not be treated primarily as a technical function carried out by IT experts who operate and manage IT systems, but as an essential business management function of the organization. And so I started asking questions. I thought this quote was actually pretty interesting. So are business leaders and managers truly involved and invested in the CRA process? Do they understand the cyber risks that are identified to their organization? And do business leaders actually act or own those risks after the cybersecurity risk assessment? Next slide, please. So when you take a master's program or a post-secondary, you end up reading a lot of academic articles during that time. Lecession, I think is how you pronounce it. I probably axed that. Is an academic author and expert in cybersecurity practices. He wrote an article about the applicability of various risk management frameworks, so ISO, NIST, FAIR, CIS, and he breaks down the CRA process into two phases. So there's really, on the right-hand side of your slide here, you see cybersecurity risk assessments, various methods that are performed during a cybersecurity risk assessment, and those are inputs to the actual risk assessment. So these are two independent exercises, if you will. That all leads down to risks at the very bottom there. And so that would be kind of the risk catalog or the risk identification process. And then finally, that like little dotted arrow there, that's where the risk framing, I would imagine, happens in terms of developing a final cybersecurity risk posture for the organization. And so the overall cybersecurity strength of an organization is really what a cybersecurity risk assessment does, how well the organization can predict, prevent, respond to ever-changing cybersecurity landscape. And it's really a final score to measure the organization's cybersecurity resilience. Next slide. The research gap. So you read a bunch of different academic articles and you try to figure out what the heck am I going to base my research on. You kind of talk to different people and really kind of understand what the cybersecurity community could use as value for your research. Most of the articles I came across were qualitative, which is people interviewing people and getting that information back, but there really wasn't a lot of quantitative research in this area. So I decided to develop a research project based on measuring the effectiveness of cybersecurity risk assessments based on how well they mitigate risks and the effects of risk for that organization. And it's in part about the after effects of the cybersecurity risk assessment. What happens next? So I rushed to my academic advisor, filled with excitement, told him I have this research topic. I'm going to start telling him about the research design and the methods and the techniques I'm going to employ. I have all this cool stuff I'm going to be doing in the research. And his response was, no, you have too much stuff. You have 5 months to conduct an academic research, narrow your scope, and figure out exactly, objectively, what you're going to achieve. So I made some adjustments, and in my research application, I really focused on small to medium businesses. Those are businesses with less than 500 employees, and then the university accepted my application. Next slide, please. So these were the 3 research aims and objectives in my application. So objective 1 was really to understand the common methods for conducting cybersecurity risk assessments. Objective 2, a little bit more ambitious. So I wanted to assess the relationship between the frequency of cybersecurity risk assessments and the occurrence of data breaches in small to medium organizations. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Objective 3 was to understand the perceptions and the attitudes of security professionals and business leaders. So I wanted to create two groups, security leaders or security professionals and business leaders, and get their perspective and compare the two. Next slide. In terms of the research design and methods, it is quantitative research. I was developing an online survey tool that took probably about a month of effort to test and make sure the instrument works well. Then we did some recruitment on LinkedIn. We call that snowball sampling, which is just word of mouth primarily. And then, because it's an academic project, we did data analysis using IBM SPSS and the Excel functions. So just using Excel. Next slide, please. I just spilt a bunch of water on me. Sorry, team. So there's these 2 sample groups that I really want to focus on. So in terms of taking this survey, we have something called an inclusion criteria. So that's the idea of the things that we require to take the survey. And it was fairly open, it was very simple, and that is the person had to be at least 18 years of age. That's a requirement of the university. They need to be proficient in English because the survey was done in English. And they need to have at least participated in a cybersecurity risk assessment in the past 5 years, so at least one. And so with that inclusion criteria, I started thinking about sample groups. So I wanted to understand the business and the organizational involvement, especially around business leaders and decision makers. And so we came up with these two sample groups, business leaders and security professionals. The one discussion that we had was, where do we put risk assessors? Should we have a separate sample group? Because they really are a little bit different from security professionals. That's more the client or the customer. Risk assessor is the one that's actually conducting the CRA. So we grouped them into the security professionals for pragmatic reasons, keep it simple, and we went with one questionnaire. And any notable differences between these two sample groups is something we'll put in our dissertation and kind of further explore. So next slide, please. So here's the sample. And the survey was open for about 4 weeks in April this year. It's such an effort to recruit. I was posting the survey information every week on LinkedIn, trying to recruit folks. And the goal is 100 participants. And that's considered a minimum number in academia to generalize your findings based on static sampling methods. So, and in fact, one of my colleagues offered me, hey, our company will sponsor your research and we'll offer folks to win a free iPad if they take and complete your survey. And unfortunately, the university's research code of ethics doesn't permit winning an iPad or sponsorship. So unfortunately, I had to pass that up, but it would have been nice to have something to offer during the recruitment phase. And so we only ended up getting 58 participants that completed the survey. We were really, truly not able to generalize the findings from an academic perspective. However, we were able to conclude and interpret some of the data, and it's fairly interesting. So 58 participants, 80% of small to medium businesses headquartered in Canada, not surprising there. 60% are employees, and about half are business leaders. Now, one of the things to note here is I miscoded one of the survey questions that creates the sample groups. And the reason why I say that is where it says 48.3% business executives, security professionals 43%, and then an other. That's a miscoding because those 5 participants weren't included in Objective 3 to really understand the perspectives of the 2 sample groups. So live and you learn. Okay, next slide, please. So here's a breakdown of all the industries that participated in the survey. There was various industries that participated. There was a bit of bias here in the participation. There was a lot of real estate industry organizations that participated. That's just because of my colleagues and in my professional network, and also a lot of academic and education participants. So again, that's just a reflect of the colleagues in my professional network. Next slide, please. So one of the things we asked participants was to provide, indicate which departments participated in the cybersecurity risk assessment. I don't think there was any really shocking. The values that came back were expected, so primarily IT, accounting, executive, HR, and information security department. Obviously, some small to medium businesses don't have an IS department, but what we saw here is what we were expecting. Next slide. So going back to the original academic, the Leschenna, I think is how you spell it, Leschenna, provided that basis for the cybersecurity security assessment methods that we wanted to know. And so we're growing our research based off of his article. And so the top one there would be IT process and system audit. So typically a firewall audit or understanding change controls in an IT department is the most common. And then compliance risk assessment, so PCI DSS, NIST, ISO, those type of assessments. And then the third one was vulnerability identification, so like an internal NESA scan to an organization would be that type of method. Next slide. So these were the type of risks that were identified based on the participation. So again, not surprising here. I think this is really expected. So 55% of participants identified technological risk. That's expected. Then we have this grouping of information risks, so confidentiality and data integrity. And we did a secondary analysis on that, thinking that that was mostly security professionals, but it was actually 60% of those folks were actually were business leaders. So the majority was actually business leaders on that count. And then you have organizational risks, which accounts for about 40%. So operational, finance, reputational, and human. We see those as organizational risks. Service and supply chain risk, about a third of the folks noted that. And then legal risks at 19%. Now at the very bottom there we have a not sure, and that's 14% of the population or participants that indicated that. And so we thought we might have a self-selection bias, which is some folks that really aren't qualified to answer the survey answered the survey. We broke that down into 5 business leaders and 3 in that other category. None of the security professionals answered not sure, which is a good news story. Next slide, please. So here are the risk frameworks that folks noted here. So ISO 27000, the ISO 27001 information security management system is probably the most popular within the group. And then you have NIST 800 and SOC type risk management frameworks that are being applied. But the big thing that came back, and my academic advisor and I talked a long time about this, but about 40% of the participants responded not sure. And so we thought we might have a problem with our survey data, especially for this question. And so again, a secondary analysis, about 80% of those folks that selected not sure are business leaders. So 19 out of the 23 that answered not sure. So my subjective interpretation of this is that business leaders don't really care about risk management frameworks that are applied or the technical details of a risk analysis. The methods don't really are the things that they don't recall. What's important to them are risks that have the greatest impact to their operations and to their organization. Just notably, the one that was another was a GLBA, so Gramm-Leach-Blimy Act, which was one of our financial institutes that participated. Next slide, please. So objective 2 was to see if cybersecurity risk assessments had a measurable effect on the number of data breaches for small to medium businesses. Participants were asked how often or how frequently they conducted cybersecurity risk assessments in the survey. And they were also asked to qualify the number of data breaches the small to medium business experienced in the past years. And then we did a correlation to take those 2 responses and chart it. So we provided participants as well a definition of a data breach. So data breach is an incident wherein information is stolen or taken from a system without the knowledge or authorization of an information owner or organization. So that was the definition that was on the survey. And what you're seeing here is the sum of data breaches qualified by all participants in the survey for the past 5 years. 41% of the total sample population, which is 24 out of 58, qualified a data breach. We were expecting 60%, so we thought it was a bit low. But that's based on academic research that happened prior, and it may be in part a limitation to our sample size. But if you notice the purple line there, that line represents the participants that qualified all the sums of the data breaches, and that's based on a yearly value. So on the 5th year there, for folks that qualified annually as their frequency, we had 13 data breaches summed up there. Now there was an interesting, again, a lot of discussion about this. There seems to be a trend from the past to today in terms of just generally a reduction in cybersecurity breaches for the participants. So that was noted. But if you look at like quarterly, there's a little bit of variation to that. Year 3 looked good, but year 2 and 1 still had data breaches. Next slide, please. So we tried to answer the question, what is the ideal frequency for conducting cybersecurity risk assessments? And so we calculated the average of the data breaches grouped by the frequency. And so what you see here on the x-axis is the different frequencies, and then on the y is the average or the value. And again, that's just adding up all the data breaches qualified in that frequency or in that category, and then dividing it by the number of participants. Again, we see sort of a downward trend. So the more you do cybersecurity risk assessments, the data breaches did go down. However, in the quarterly category, we had 2 participants in this category that qualified several data breaches in the past 5 years. In fact, there were bigger companies. And so we have this ski jump effect for the quarterly, unfortunately. Now, notably, continuously would be like monthly and almost like running cybersecurity risk assessments on just a continual basis. And we had, I think, 3 participants in that category. And again, this probably is a reflection of the sample size, only being 58 participants. Next slide, please. So objective 2, we had some challenges. It went a little left field. And luckily, objective 3, we now look at the perceptions between these 2 groups, security professionals and business leaders. And so we had a Likert scale. So, your typical strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree, that type of scale. And we have a histogram analysis where we separate the 2 groups, and then we show kind of the attitudes and perceptions. And so 58% of the population strongly agrees that CRAs are easy to read and understand. 17% are neutral, 25% disagree. And so one of the things that we concluded in the dissertation is some of the CRAs potentially have a lot of technical jargon, and it's not necessarily tailored for every target audience, including C-level type audiences, and that may be an area for improvement. Next slide. CRAs are valuable for risk management practices. This was very positive, so 73% suggest that CRAs are valuable for risk management practices. 25% are neutral, 2% disagree. Next slide. And so we just asked the question, or put a statement up, do CRAs help mitigate data breaches and get perceptions on that? 55% agree or strongly agree. 40% were neutral, and 5% disagree. Next slide, please. CRAs influence change and investments. And this one really stood out for us in the analysis. 83% of the population agree or strongly agree. 13% were neutral and 4% disagree. And so we even asked this question in a different way. Next slide, please. Did the small to medium business organization act based on the guidance they were given of a cybersecurity risk assessment? And to me, this was one of the bigger indicators in the survey that indicates effectiveness and influencing decision makers to remediate and act. And overwhelmingly, we had 84% that said that they made an investment or a change based on a cybersecurity risk assessment. Next slide. So towards the end of the survey, we asked folks to give their comments and their recommendations for cybersecurity risk assessments. one of the comments that came back was to make cybersecurity risk assessments more accessible for lay people. Again, going potentially to the language and some of the recommendations in technical jargon. CRAs should focus more on business-specific risks and prevention. Risk management standards should be endorsed, but one size does not fit all. Incorporate automation, AI, robotic processing automation for certain assessment processes. So I think some of the folks that were in the sample were actual risk assessors, and they provided this feedback. And just further knowledge sharing among cybersecurity community to improve CRAs and the perspectives of what CRAs do. Next slide, please. So this is our conclusion. So the findings indicate that CRAs do help to reduce cyber risks for small to medium businesses. Over 80% of the surveyed participants indicate that the CRA guidance provided them enough information to act or invest. Overall, participants' perspectives were very positive about cybersecurity risk assessments. However, the sample population wasn't perfect. Ideally, we'd like to see over 100 participants in the next survey. And more academic research needs to be done on this particular topic. Great, and that's the presentation. Any questions, please? Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. After this CRA assessment, that individual staying and take an extra. Yeah, so the question was that one question that had over 80% of the participants ask about, did they make an investment? Did they make an action, right? I think that probably doesn't relate to the data breach as much because we didn't really ask that. We asked more specifically, like, did the cybersecurity risk assessment provide you value in able to invest or create an action out of it? But it is a good question. There are certain aspects of this topic that we wish we could ask more questions, but it was about 15 minutes of people's time to complete the survey, so we had to limit some of the things that we initially put in there. Go ahead. You might have to speak up so I can hear you. You're welcome. Yeah. Yeah. But does have an industry, for example, oil and gas. Yep. Yep. The amount of frameworks that you that the based off of was all United States. Do you consider any Canadian ones? Right. Yeah. Because they're Canadian. Right. Okay, yeah, I'm going to repeat the question just for the folks that are online. So the question is did we consider other risk management frameworks that are more Canadian-based, outcome-based in that particular question in examining that? So we just look at, to be honest, a lot of the research was just based on US standards. ISO, I would argue, is more international because that's from, the organizations in Switzerland, I think, isn't it? But I think that's something that could be done. We initially thought that we were going to get US and Canadian organizations, and these were the common risk management frameworks that we went with. There was a category of other, but even that participant qualified a US-based risk management framework. Go ahead. Yeah. And then you have to average 3 years. Maybe they don't know how many questions and then higher, and then the ones that annually, as their program is getting more at the beginning and eventually they get in line. So I'm just kind of like, to me, you think
the other way around. So I was wondering on that. What was it?
Yeah, I mean, some of the discussions I had with my academic advisor on this particular chart was, I had anticipated, so there's only 3 participants for 2 to 3 years, right? And I think in part sample size kind of isn't ideal because it takes 1 participant to have a few data breaches and kind of skews the data. But in terms of awareness, 70% that qualified a data breach they were in the security professional sample group, 30% to business leaders. And it is a bit difficult to do the research the way we did it. Asking business leaders to qualify their data breaches in the past 5 years without their general counsel beside them and an NDA, I think in part this test wasn't 100%. I think we did get some good data from security professionals. I don't know if we got great data from business leaders, and it could be awareness as well, because that is one of the things that is in the literature, is that small to medium businesses, especially on the smaller scale of that 0 to 500 employees, tend to not have the security awareness because they think they're small, and they're not a target, but really in reality, they are a target. They just don't realize it. Another question? Sorry, she was first. Go ahead. Yeah, so the question was what frequency would I recommend to small to medium businesses based on the research? Looking at the data and just experience, for me, it has to be at least annually. We typically do biannual to quarter. It kind of matters what the cybersecurity insurance provider wants. It matters, PCI DSS has to happen every year. And there may be other assessments. One thing that I would point out is when we talk about cybersecurity risk assessment, there's sort of a formal cybersecurity risk assessment, and that's those 2 phases. So a lot of the times we're doing, security tests. And we're figuring out the vulnerabilities all the time. We're running, if you're a customer of Tenable.io or Qualysys, you're running vulnerability assessments all the time. But an actual formalized report that goes to your CEO, I would suggest that would be at least annually. Go ahead.
Did you notice that one framework was professionals versus business people over? So saying did some it's easier to follow or soft?
I'm not an expert in this field, but what I learned in the literature review is it feels like FAIR is one of the risk frameworks that really uses, financial value. You really can easily communicate that to the C-level because this is our financial risk based on this information system having these vulnerabilities. Having that is really easy to qualify to the C-level. I find that, just based on my experience, that there's a lot of literature that says that the NIST is for US government agencies and it can't be applied to other organizations. I would say that's inaccurate because I think when you really go deep into NIST 800, especially the .53, that's applicable to a variety of different organizations, and I like NIST. That's just who I am. But, if you're my colleague Mike Primo and you like the ISO 27000, the ISMS, that's also a great standard as well. But it also sort of matters what you're trying to achieve. Is this a SOC audit because it's a financial audit? Or is this high tech because you're healthcare? So, yeah. Hopefully that answered it. Yeah, it did? Okay, sorry, it was a bit of a roundabout answer. I apologize. Go ahead.
Is there any correlation?
Sorry. Yeah, I wanted to make that, sorry, I'm just going to repeat the question just for the online. So was there a correlation of the risk management frameworks in relation to the data breaches? And so that was one of, we'll call it a sub-objective that we were looking at doing. We didn't make that We just felt like our sample size wasn't big enough to even make that correlation. We were just mostly focused on frequency. But I encourage folks to look at this and say, there should be a correlation of data breaches to risk management frameworks to understand which risk management frameworks perform better than others. That's what I suggest. Great question. Sorry, in the back first, sorry.
Number of pages. It depends on amount of work the team is putting behind the scene. So if you are not going to fix your vulnerabilities, second risk assessment is going to give you the same result.
If not more.
So is there a relationship behind the scene, how much work each company has done? And my second question is with respect to data breaches, one company have 5 data breaches. But what was the cost of that data breach? Yeah. One company has one data breach, which can cost 100.
Yeah. The research didn't go down that road, but that's an interesting question. So two questions. First question was, what's the effort in the remediation, the after effects? It's hard to say. That's something that we didn't really go into. We were mostly focused on understanding that decision makers and business leaders in the organization actually do something with this document, this report that they get back. It doesn't just get consumed by the IT manager or the security manager and they do some changes with configuration, for example. So we really wanted to know if organizations own these risks. And so that kind of research around how much remediation effort is something that I'd like to see on. The second was the cost of the data breaches that were qualified. We didn't ask that as well, but I think having a business leader qualify the data breaches, a laptop gets lost into the wild, even though it's encrypted. Still a risk, considered a data breach. So I think we did a quick definition of what a data breach is, but this kind of research is probably done better when you're actually doing in-depth interviews with the right folks from that organization, rather than doing a survey instrument like we did. So go ahead. Thank you.
Size.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's interesting. It's too bad we get more size that is more diverse, but it's interesting because I think right now there's a lot of problems with Canada doesn't have a legislation around independence. There's no there's in the US they're coming towards it right now. Traded some of these companies are smaller. So I'm hoping that we evolve over time that there is more time to become more conscious.
Right.
Because going back to Michael's presentation, I think it's not like they will be compromised in the future. I think it comes down to that they already probably have someone on their network and they don't know it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're given 15 minutes of a person's time, a survey instrument. What do you want to achieve with your objectives? And I would say objective 2 would have been much better if we had that sample size, especially if it was over 100. So can't offer a free iPad though. That was the challenge. And 4 weeks. Get it done in 4 weeks. Good luck. See you later. That's the academic advisor advice. So any other questions? Yeah, one more question.
Maybe you kind of mentioned this before, but do you think your results are graphically different if I got that one or
I wanted, we had, I think, 2 participants from energy. And, in Calgary, I guess I got to get out there a bit more and get more colleagues in energy. I would have liked to have seen more participants in oil and gas. I anticipate, yeah, the evidence would look different. There would be potentially more data breaches. The thing is, though, is the small to medium businesses, Stats Canada says 0 to 500 employees. There's a huge range there. So it might make sense to break it up by industry sector or something to that effect. So, yeah, good question. Thank you.
What did you define as a data breach? Because you talked about NIST, so NIST
Yeah.
has 207 always compromised mindset.
Yeah.
How do you define what a data breach is? And do you feel like organizations should prevent it breaches to how do I minimize the blast radius that happens?
Yeah, so the definition we put on the survey is a data breach is an incident wherein information is stolen or taken from a system or organization without the knowledge of the authorized information owner, which again might be too much technical jargon, or organization. So we threw that definition up there. I don't know if it explains it well enough, but really it's the loss of sensitive information. Like it's simple as that. And if you lost control, again, like if you have a laptop that leaves the organization, it's lost in the wild, even if that thing's encrypted, data breach. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Okay. Thanks for all these questions. Appreciate it.
So you mentioned the risk you need to see these metrics get an understanding.
Yeah.
So if I understand secrets that they suffer, but risk assessments might not be exactly the same risk assessments in the business owner. You understand they're doing an organizational level risk assessment.
Right.
What did you understand the mitigations from the CRA? Did you put it through a management system, or did you see how business owners are understanding it and then at what point on stage does management understand the data?
Yeah. And I think so. Can I just summarize that?
Yeah.
When are like C-level or business leaders able to understand the data? Can we go back to the slide for I'm going to axe his name again. Leschena's side. It's the one with the two phases, right at the beginning. I think it's slide 3. Okay. So I think just based on the research and talking to people, risk framing is an art. And there's multiple factors to getting business leaders to really understand and own a cybersecurity risk assessment. One is their participation. That includes in-depth interviewing. And so all of this stuff right here for security testing, business leaders aren't necessarily interested in the details or the minutia of what's happening in here. It's more around risk evaluation and then firing it over to the cybersecurity risk posture, because it has to be framed in a way that business understands it. So it's almost like cybersecurity risk assessments in a lot of ways have to be tailored for two target audiences: security professionals and business leaders. And it's really the executive summary to the business leaders that if it's framed in regards to what their operations, how it impacts the operations or their organization, then that's when a CRA is very effective. And I don't think that always happens. Yeah, I hope that answered the question. I wish you were on our research team. You seem to have the right questions. Okay, we might want to talk afterwards. Okay, sounds good. Any other questions? I hope it answered everyone's questions. Okay, good. Okay, well, thank you for everyone's time here.